So hello everyone, welcome to the second lecture within our Peace Studies lecture series. And today I have a pleasure and honor of greeting Her Excellency Tamara Grdzelidze, the ambassador of Georgia to the Holy See. But Tamara is not just a diplomat, she is primarily a scholar, which makes this opportunity to have her here all the more interesting, because as all scholars, she doesn't need always to be as diplomatic as her fellow colleagues from the world of diplomacy usually need to be. Just a couple of words to introduce our today's speaker. Tamara graduated from Tbilisi University in Georgia, and after that she studied at postgraduate level at St. Vladimir's Seminar in New York, and also at Oxford in Great Britain. From 2001 to 2013, if I'm not mistaken, she served at the World Council of Churches as something executive, something a complicated title. And after that, she was nominated, appointed ambassador of Georgia to the Holy See. What I sometimes say half jokingly, but I think actually there is a grain of truth in that she's Pope Francis' favorite ambassador to the Holy See, I think. I witnessed to some of their meetings, and he's always very happy when he sees her. Her scholarly work is equally, if not even more interesting than the diplomatic aspect of her service. She has contributed to essentially I would say three fields of Orthodox theology. One is ecumenical theology, another is ecclesiology, and also patristics. She wrote on church fathers, primarily Maximus the Confessor, but also others. So it is my very great pleasure and honor to introduce Tamara and the lecture for today, which is titled Faith and Politics, Russia, Ukraine, Russia, Georgia, Ukraine. Yeah, that is important, which is very relevant topic for understanding today's affairs in the world. So Tamara, please, the floor is all yours.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. Very nice to be with students. That's something I miss very much here in this place. And I'm finishing my term actually very soon, so perhaps I will be able to speak freely now on this very interesting but also provocative theme like politics and religion, or faith and politics. I don't know how much you are following the current affairs between Ukraine and Russia. Yeah, more or less, probably all of you heard that it's very sort of delicate situation at the moment between the churches, which is primarily supported by the states, both states. So I invented another. Thank you to Professor Tamara Grdzelidze for inviting me to this lecture. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be in your company. We are good friends and colleagues. Participated together in several conferences. So it was nice. Yes, I invented a new title for my lecture, and let's call it subtitle, because in private talks I used this phrase so often that I'm afraid of hearing it from other people, so I better now say this is my title. So, imperialism versus nationalism, this is the title. And for those who understand more sort of theology. I don't know if anyone studies theology here. It would be another, so imperialism versus nationalism, comma, political versus ecclesiological. So imperialism goes with political, nationalism with ecclesiological. Well, it's not quite, it's not a formula to be identified 100%, but it's sort of a framework within which I would like to speak. And I have 30 minutes, or yeah.
As much as you wish.
Oh, you know I'm Orthodox. Okay, so
But not Russian.
no, not really. So what do we know today about nationalism and imperialism? I'm sure that all students of social sciences today study about nationalism and imperialism, because you come across these concepts. And even if you don't study, if you haven't studied in particular these concepts, you know what is it about. Well, imperialism is much more sort of not relevant sort of issue, sort of, but really it is, because we hear about Western imperialism, about different kinds of imperialism. Now, today, for me, what I will be speaking about imperialism will be as performed in this case that we will look at together with you, will be related to Russia. So Russian imperialism against nationalism as expressed in today's talk by Ukraine. So what do we know about these concepts now? First thing that comes to mind about imperialism is that this is related to, in the past was related to colonies, protectorates, and spheres of influence. So colonies more or less are in the past, and protectorates also, but spheres of influence are still in place. So, and in some cases very much so. Yeah. And then the question, if it's very general. I'm not making a lecture on imperialism, just to give you a little introduction to why I'm using these terms with regard to the church and state relations between Russia and Ukraine today. So imperialism, because of the gain that one party gains, because of the benefit that one party gains, can never be tolerated in today's world. This is either economic interest at the expense of other groups. This is something that one party benefits greatly at the expense of the other one, or other ones. Psychologically also, imperialism today exists psychological sort of imperialism, which has to do something with impressing others by one's own privileges and power. I don't know if you come across a very short story by George Orwell, Shooting the Elephant, if you know. If you haven't read, it's very short, it's interesting. So it's exactly about this impressing through imperialism and how wrong is this. And in one of his essays, Orwell says that imperialism, sometimes they think he says it's about nationalism, but I believe that it's about imperialism, that it's power hunger tempered by self-deception. So you understand that you are you bring something bigger, and you can do it at the expense of other people. Now, nationalism is also not a very positive word in today's world, and we know, but it's much more ambivalent and much more ambiguous than imperialism. So, nationalism was the way, in many cases, to gain, for instance, national sovereignty, to reach national sovereignty, to get rid of other powers. So nationalism is much more. We must be much more careful when speaking about nationalism. And I don't want to say that there is good nationalism and bad nationalism, but if we speak about national states, for instance, yes, at the moment this is the reality in which we live. And I'm sure you've studied in history about the end of the 30 Years' War in Europe and the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, and this principle of controlling sovereignty, yes, which is an exclusive right of a state, has gone into the chart of the United Nations. So it's something that is still pretty much contested, but at the same time is valid, and we live in the reality of nation states. I don't know if you watched yesterday. It was an interesting, very, very important and interesting in many ways celebration of 100 years of the First World War, armistice, yes, in Paris. And with all the headlines actually took this from President Macron's speech, that he said that nationalism today is a betrayal of patriotism. And immediately, the non-right wing, because I can't call everyone who is not right left, but not right wing, immediately interpreted as in the presence of President Trump that that he, I mean. So it's something to be very much concerned about in our times when we speak about nationalism, with its huge baggage. It brings with it a lot, this concept, but at the same time this is reality in which we live, and it has lots of potential to fight against something also. And now this fight, not entirely in the positive way, but I will try to show you how this nationalism is trying to avoid imperialism in terms of Orthodox churches in Russia and Ukraine. So one of my friends, who is a Moscow-based American journalist, wrote recently on her Facebook, Sophie Kishkovsky, that I didn't expect to see in my lifetime that everybody knows the word autocephaly, because it's been so widely used now, autocephaly, and this is really a very specific word, and only theologians and perhaps even ecclesiologists would know. Not all students of theology, but autocephaly, especially that is more about the first centuries of Christianity, that the Catholics are not so much concerned. I learned it from my students. I was teaching in Rome, in Angelicum, and I discovered from my students, Catholic students, that the first centuries of Christianity they learn in a very specific way. So, for instance, they were students, master students, and they didn't know what was autocephaly. Probably they are very happy now that they learned about it from me, because you come across it. So it's a Greek word. It's the word means it's several meanings, but the most importantly it is self-governance. This is the concept which appeared within the Byzantine Empire. So some local churches were given the right to be self-governing churches. So the early churches were pentarchy, the 5 patriarchates were self-governing churches, and then after then they sort of became more, and especially after the first millennium, the number of autocephalous churches grew. Georgia, for instance, because it's in the title, I would like to mention it. Georgian Church is one of the oldest state church. Was Christianized in the 4th century, and from the 5th century, then step by step, it's been gaining this autocephalous status, because autocephaly is also not something that you go and buy one day. I mean, it's a process also, and so nowadays, today there is a big struggle, I would say, or rivalry between the Church of Orthodox Church, Orthodox people in Ukraine, and the Moscow Patriarchate. Because I will try to be accurate in terminology. So, Moscow Patriarchate, because the Orthodox in Ukraine at the moment are against being controlled by the Patriarchate in Moscow. So the thing, I mean, it's a lot of history behind, so I cannot go into all the details, but I will refer to some. Perhaps most of you heard that in the 10th century, towards the end of the 10th century, Christianity, Slav groups in Europe, Slavs, were evangelized, received Christianity, and official sort of beginning of this started in Kiev, which was the capital of Rus. Which didn't exist. Moscow was not very much on the map at the time. Then, during centuries, things changed, and by the 17th century, the situation was quite complex with all the wars and economic situation near Kiev. So in Rus, which was surrounding, because Ukraine is also Rus, but it's not Russia. See, so it's all Rus in terms of big Russia, small Russia. Ukraine, Slavs, let's say Slavs, yes? So Ukraine, Kiev was not in good shape. So Kiev lost its power to govern, completely, entirely govern its own church. Moscow became a leader in this difficult situation, and their mother church, which was Constantinople, and Constantinople is now it's Istanbul, as you know, but it was the mother church. So I mean, it's quite complicated. But Byzantium, Byzantium. So we are dealing with Byzantium gave this right to the Slavs to establish their own church, end of the 10th century, and then it was in control. Byzantium was in control. But towards the 17th century, things went also very bad in former Byzantium. In the 17th century, Constantinople didn't have, that power and might which it had in the 10th century when they gave this right to Kiev to be self-governing church. So Constantinople in the 17th century, mid-17th century, gives the right to Moscow to, because the document says, because of economic reasons and the wars, to anoint bishops and to ordain bishops and priests in the Kiev area. And also Metropolitan was in Kiev, was subordinate to both Moscow, but in the first place to Constantinople. So very soon this situation changed. So it's a lot of history to dig up. And we are not specialists. I am not either. But as I said to Dava today, it's so much is written. I even came across the Greek Thomas given in 1648 or 1686. 1686 was given to Kiev Thomas, and its Greek text was published, and it's very interesting because in original document you understand better how things, because in translation it always loses and it always goes in favor of one who wants to translate in his or in their own language. So anyway, so the situation was complex, and Kiev was not capable of pursuing this complexity to the end. So in the 20th century, then as soon as Ukraine became independent in 1918, but for a very short period, after the, because the Russian revolutions gave rise to independence in former Russian Empire. For instance, Georgia was declared independent, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Ukraine as well. But it was a very short period of independence, and during this period, Ukrainians tried to ask or raise the issue of autocephaly, but then it disappeared very soon. So in 91, after so many years, when again collapse or nearly collapse of the Soviet Union, Georgia, was before the coup in Moscow, but with Ukraine it was a little bit later. Ukraine again, as soon as it became independent, it started requesting or searching independence for its national church. Now, why? What is this? What is about this national church? Why Orthodox churches can be national? So, unlike the Catholics, probably because you are in Rome, and perhaps some of you are Catholics, you know better how Catholic church operates. I mean, yes, certainly regionally Catholics are also very different, but they all have one head, so Pope, right? And Pope tries to, or Holy See tries to keep things together, not to lose the track, but there is less danger for nationalism in the Catholic Church because of this, that there is a structure which unites 1 and the 2 billion Catholics, they say today, the number, worldwide. While with the Orthodox, things are very different. Orthodox are united, this 14, for some 15, this is also confusing, but let's say 14. 14 Orthodox churches are united only through the Eucharistic communion. So they don't have an organization or a structure which brings them together. They don't have a Supreme Court where they can go and ask for, that we have problems and we have to find out what is happening. So this is a little bit of a voluntary based association between the Orthodox. And the Orthodox theology and ecclesiology calls it a word synodality, because synaxis is again another Greek word, which is to sit together. Synodality is means that these local churches, these 14 Orthodox churches, local churches that are Serbian church, Georgian church, Romanian church, Armenian church, no, Armenian is different, Russian church, Bulgarian, 14 churches, Antiochian, Jerusalem, they are they are together only because they come to sit together and talk to one another and decide things. But this is an idea, and the problem, all the problems at the moment, especially the Ukrainian problem, emerged from the situation that at the moment Orthodox are not capable of talking to one another at the synodal level. So synodal level of talk is completely different. The Pope uses now a lot this word, but he expanded the meaning, and it's a little bit different now. With synodality, for instance, today, when Pope speaks about synodality and, for instance, the last synod on youth, yeah, it's meant that, for instance, that the participation of women, yes, was one of the issues that now in paragraph 148 now in this synodal document, it says that members of the synod must consider very seriously participation of women. But this synodality is not quite the same what is meant with, under the Orthodox synodality. Orthodox synodality is that all these local national churches, Orthodox churches, are together in deciding things, in creating one church. So it's quite idealistic view in a way, if you want. It's so nice not to have a structure and to be united, but at the moment, it does not work. So Orthodox are facing serious problems at the moment, and the first, not first, but one of the first very big results of this problem is exactly this Moscow-Ukraine question. So, how do they discuss? When they met the Orthodox at the synodal level last time, in the 8th century. So it's been quite a time, 8th century. So the first ecumenical 7 councils are considered by the Orthodox when all the decisions about the church were made in synodality. And these are absolutely the cornerstone of the Orthodox teaching. But after 8th century, you understand that life has changed, and I mean nothing is so how to say relevant to changes or reflecting changes as the church. So, and the Orthodox Church has a problem to face this changes at the synodal level because they don't have an instrument. They don't have the Pope who invites all of them to discuss things and make decisions. So, in this situation now, would you? Perhaps I should ask you if it's not clear, and I'm sure it's not 100% clear, but if you want to ask a question about what I said so far, about the nature of it, if you wish to ask me a question, clarification question. Yes, please.
Yeah, I have one. So when you were discussing the synods and having all of the different churches come together in the way that they have, is that also part of the nationalist movement, or is it considered slightly separate? Where does it fall?
No, all the churches, you mean the Orthodox churches, yes? Yeah. But these are national churches, Okay. For instance, Georgian church is a national church, Serbian church is a national church, Bulgarian church is a national church, Romanian church is a national church. They do come, certainly, sometimes. Constantinople is still the See of Constantinople, or Patriarchate, has the primacy of honor. He's not primate, but primacy of honor, which was given to the See of Constantinople in 325, the First Nicene Council, because it was the empire, and it was because of the Byzantine throne that it was given to Constantinople. Sometimes they come together, and sometimes they make decisions, but they cannot, at this level, make any dramatic change into the church doctrine, because for that reason they need to have this synodal. I mean, they call it synaxes when they come, primates come, but this one of the first synaxes after 8th century should have been the meeting in Crete in 2 years ago, in June 2016. All churches, after 2.5 years of preparation, were supposed to go and discuss, start discussing issues, but Moscow didn't go, boycotted, they didn't go, and so it was part of the problem. Yeah. Because then, and 3 other sort of satellite churches followed Russia, and they didn't go either, one of them Georgia. Yeah, so it's national within the state borders. It's very national, yes. I mean, Georgian church is very nationalistic, Serbian church is very nationalistic. But when they come together, this is a problem that they cannot get together and discuss at length, because they all bring their national interests. Especially those, majority of these states are newly emerged states, or states that had a long gap in between being a state and not being a state, being annexed, being under Ottoman Empire. You know, this also, they don't have, these states don't have civil sector as developed as in other European countries, for instance. So this is all is affected in, affects the situation in the church. Okay, so yeah, perhaps more questions?
Which is the role of the patriarchs in all these national churches when they meet with each other? What kind of delegation of representation?
You mean in within the states?
Each
yeah, they are absolutely. They are popes in their
present their national church when they meet in their synod.
Yeah, yes, they are popes in their own countries. So that's, you know, full authority and leading in synods. Yeah, so they have full power and they are in charge of the. Yeah, again, it depends on the society. You know, for instance, which country would be a good example of those country with more? I can't think of any. You know, most are under severe nationalism at the moment, because this is what, but not nationalism in good sense, sort of, that I mentioned that is possible. But the reason is there, you know, as I said, all of them are newly emerged churches, and all of them have to prove themselves and have to establish themselves against, also in these pluralistic societies, which they are not used to act in these pluralistic societies. So this is, in a way, excuse is there, but, you know, it's better that they were behaving in a different manner and paying more attention at the Christian teaching and not nationalism. But unfortunately, it's not so. But even worse than, yeah, but this nationalism is also taken as a political power, because it's very strong. I mean, for instance, in Georgia, church is a very strong political agent. You know, everybody is taking a step to approach the church. Church has a lot of influence over society. I think it's a little bit different in Serbia, no? But church has power. For instance, in Russia, church is very rich and very well established and very closely associated with the government. So it has its own power. The church is very influential. And Is
the church in Istanbul a nationalist church?
No, Istanbul is in good situation because they have no country. So if they had a country, and you know, they would be different. But yeah, there are, I mean, less than 2,000 Christians, I think, left in Constantinople. But Constantinople has its jurisdictions. So in every country, theoretically, in theory, in every country where there is not a traditional Orthodox church or one of the autocephalous churches, the ecumenical patriarch can offer its guidance. And so ecumenical patriarchate has churches outside of Istanbul in many countries, in the US and Australia. But nowadays you find bishops from all national churches in one country. You know why? Exactly because of nationalism, because the Christianity, but also this is vernacular. You cannot blame very much people. It's the Orthodox, Catholics also now are vernacular, which means that when with this massive migration, if they go to a new place, they want church in their own language. Yeah, sometimes they leave, especially economic migrants in countries they don't speak this language, and they find church as a really place where they can go and feel secure, because it's like a club, national club, and they feel at home there. So many factors, yeah. So, and now, what about flying? What about Moscow and Kiev? So, in a way, yeah, the major principle for autocephaly is, in the Orthodox Church, is to have a territorial church. So, Serbian church is autocephalous within the Serbian territory. Georgian church is autocephalous within the Georgian territory. But Russian church wants to be autocephalous everywhere. So, and they don't take seriously into account that Ukraine is a sovereign state. Actually, every country declared that they recognize sovereignty of Ukraine, and they are member of all international organizations. They are, yeah. But because of this, Russia does not want to lose its old allies, and Russia tries to keep its control and influence over former Soviet republics. Well, certainly Baltics are gone. They cannot do it, and although NATO has been sending a lot of troops recently to Baltic republics because of the borders with Russia, but in places like in the Caucasus, in Ukraine, in Belarus. Also, these countries are not quite identical. They have different status at the moment, but Russia tries to keep its control. And what's the best way to keep your control and influence? If you make them weak. So, in 2008, Russia took 20% of the territory from Georgia, which is a small country anyway. It's 70,000 square kilometers. And imagine, if you are Americans, imagine 20% of your country being occupied. So, and also their behavior in Georgia is like, as soon as Georgia gets a new agreement, a new step with NATO, they move borders, this occupation line. So they do whatever they wish. Our policy is not to use forces, because they can kill us all in one day. So we are less than 4 million people, and we cannot stand. Ukraine is different. It's a huge country. It's about under 70 million, I believe. And certainly the 60 something, yeah. No? Or more? No, do you know how?
I think it's 30.
30? Oh, you can check it. Yeah, perhaps I'm not very good with numbers. So. Yeah, but it's much bigger, 10 times or more here. Perhaps it's 30 something. I remember this phrase. So, and in 2014, Russia took Crimea, and this is Russian policy also. They invade a place, then local ethnic population leaves, and then they have a referendum. And the referendum wants, it was the same with Ossetia and Abkhazia. We have 10% of the Georgian population is internally displaced. They left Abkhazia and Ossetia. The same is true about, what is it?
44.
Okay, 44. In between. Crimea, and then after that referendum is made, and then the result is clear. So people who are left, they want to remain with the Russian Federation. And so this is a big problem. The war is still going on in Ukraine. It's not on the news anymore, because when conflict, the same is about the Georgian conflict. So nobody speaks on the news about the Georgian conflict. But when 2 weeks ago, Archbishop Gallagher, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Holy See, was in Georgia, we were in Georgia and visited the occupation line. Although he knew about it from me, but it was very, he was impressed in a bad way by this, what he saw, that how the people's villages, are divided, and people lost sometimes some members of the families are on the other side, and they cannot. And checkpoints, they reduced. There were 6 checkpoints. Now there is 1 checkpoint. So the same similar tendencies. So the style is the same in Ukraine, but style is the same, but the scale is different. Ukraine is big, and the Crimea is also a big place. Now, on the basis of this, Moscow had to go to Crete in 2016 in order to discuss many important issues regarding the church, including the way of granting autocephaly. Because many churches said that it's not fair that ecumenical patriarch is one who has this right, because he inherited it from the first centuries, and it's time to discuss how autocephaly can be granted. But they didn't go to this council, so the question was not discussed. And this was a big blow to ecumenical patriarchate, I must tell you, because it's been 50 years that the council has been in preparation. So from the late 60s, early 70s, the Orthodox at various occasions, especially within the World Council of Churches in Geneva, being in consultation to prepare for this council. And eventually all signed to have this council, but then 4 churches didn't go under Russian guidance. So this is one step. Another thing is that Ukraine had a very difficult situation until very recently. Actually, 11th of October changed the situation. There were 3 jurisdictions in Ukraine, out of which 2 were non-canonical, and it's a very big problem for the Orthodox. Its church is non-canonical. Non-canonical church means that the other Orthodox churches don't recognize this church. Remember what I said, that our unity consists in a communion, Eucharistic communion, and if one church is not in communion with other churches, it means that this is if the others, 14 churches or 13, let's say, all don't recognize canonicity or canonic, nature of the church, then this church becomes non-canonical. And in Ukraine, after 91, there were 2 non-canonical churches. One was formed by people, Ukrainians who were fed up with the Moscow Patriarchate, to be under the Moscow Patriarchate. They wanted to have their own church, but you know, in church nothing happens in one day. They couldn't achieve this, so they formed this church, and they were non-canonical. Also, the other church, you know, because the heads also is also a problem. Leaders are not always in agreement. So there were two non-canonical churches. Now, last month, on the 11th of October, Constantinople did a funny thing in a way. The synod received such a decision to abolish the right given in 1686. See, Orthodox time frame is very interesting. So, to abolish, withdraw this right given to the to Moscow to have power over Kiev. So it annulled that Moscow, according to the ecumenical patriarch, now patriarchate has no power to be to have its jurisdiction in Kiev. So now it is ecumenical patriarchate, but ecumenical patriarchate it's temporarily, because ecumenical patriarchate wants to summon a synod which will decide what to do about the autocephalous church. So now you find all sorts of information in the press that Thomas has been given, that it's already autocephalous, it's not yet. Or Bartholomew, or ecumenical patriarch from Constantinople, sent to his exarchs, sort of bishops who are going to explore the situation in Ukraine, who are going to prepare the situation, and then there will be all Ukrainian council, church council or synod, which has to decide how to proceed to form autocephalous, so national, independent, national Orthodox Church. Well, I don't think it's an easy task. I mean, they will have a lot of problems to decide who and how, but this is another matter. The thing is that it will happen sooner or later, and it seems that Moscow is losing about, I don't know, maybe 20, I don't know, many parishes. I mean, one statistic, the most recent I saw, I examined it today, it says that in Ukraine, 75% of population says that they are Orthodox. Out of this 75%, depending on regions, 13 to 20% says that they belong to the Moscow Patriarchate, and 46% says that they belong to these other non-canonical Ukrainian churches, which are not anymore non-canonical, because Bartholomew took away this schism from them. And so they are now formally under Constantinople, under Bartholomew. But this is the bulk of the future church, future autocephalous church in Ukraine. Certainly, the fear is that, if not many, at least some of the people who are now with the Moscow Patriarchate, Ukrainians, they would go and be with autocephalous church. So Moscow is losing, and because in Russia this is considered a big political issue, that's why I said it's political versus ecclesiological. For Ukraine to seek autocephaly is quite legitimate. It's a nationalistic thing. Certainly Poroshenko is using it before the election and presidential elections. This is clear, but this is also nationalistic in terms that it's quite legitimate, according to the Orthodox ecclesiology, to seek in an independent national state, national autonomy or autocephaly. independence for the national church. It is quite legitimate, absolutely, full stop. Well, how it is used there, Poroshenko is nationalistic, they say, but what he did, with all the faults, I'm not praising him. You have to consider situations, and we are not very happy with many leaders in the church, in the world. So, but Poroshenko has now characteristics of national states. What is nation states characteristic? That sovereignty, yes, but what you are concerned about under this sovereignty, military power, language, or some kind of common ground, cultural ground, one of which is important is language and religion. And Poroshenko is one which is considered to a president helped to improve all these three aspects of his new state. So Ukraine, according to recent development, religiously or church-wise, he's been helping the state. He has increased considerably. That's what they say in the press. I can't verify it, but it is said that Ukrainian language is now very much in, and military side also being very much enlarged, military forces. So yes, he's nationalistic, and he probably is trying very much, especially his recent visit to Bartolomeo and this obscure statement, treaty that they made with the church, but still he needs something because it will take time, perhaps years, to grant a tomos, which will be the final document saying that Ukrainian church is now autocephalous. Constantinople gave to Kiev in the beginning this, to Moscow this, so I mean, this tomos is a tomos in Greek means a document. It's nothing very special. So it's a document which describes what is happening. So why Moscow is so concerned? In my view, because it wants to keep its soft power influence over this ex-Soviet countries. It wants to continue being a dominant power in the region, and Russia does not want clearly to have strong neighbors. It wants to be. He wants to be strongest. I mean, Russia. So I have so many friends, and when I speak, even say this word, I feel, that I'm betraying my friends. But current Russian politics, let's say, or current administration in Russia. So I think this is how imperialism versus nationalism can be described. That nationalism is not something that we today can admire, but on the other hand, it's something that is within the legitimate concerns. And imperialism is something that I don't think that it can be justified at any moment. So I think this is what I tell you, and you can ask questions.